Linda and welcome to my channel. Today I am doing another in my spicy opinions video. However, this one I'm not sure is really that spicy. There are a couple little points I'll bring up that may be spicy to some people, but generally I don't think this is super spicy. And I am going to talk about what I call EEEs, or effective educational experiences. More specifically, I'm going to talk about books that I read in my middle school and high school years that were good experiences or effective experiences and were bad or ineffective experiences. I do want to do a couple disclaimers here. I am a huge supporter of public schools and teachers, and I don't want to dump on teachers. I am not dumping on teachers at all. Just put that out there. Teachers, I understand, especially in public school systems, teachers don't always have a choice about what they teach and when they teach it. So this is not meant to dump on teachers. Secondly, I'm going to use the word book a lot. Book just refers to any work. It could be poetry. Actually, it's not going to be poetry because I don't think I'm talking about poetry in any of this. But it could be play, whatever. Just book just means work, because I don't want to sit there and think about make sure I'm using the right term and all this. So we're just going to say book. Third, this is personal to my experience, which was, okay, you guys can do the math. I graduated high school in 1991. So things have changed. There's different things. I don't know. I can just go by my own experience and what I thought of it. So there is that. Also, I'm going to put this out here because I'm a little more controlled at the moment, and I'm afraid that if I say this later and explain this later in the video, I will be not as controlled about it, and then I will start dumping on a teacher, which I don't want to do. But the way my sort of literature education was, middle school, we had English, which was grammar and literature and all that. And then we had English in freshman and sophomore year in high school. And then junior year, we took American literature, which was my experience, the only literature-based class that I took that was just literature. Now, the way my high school worked, our senior year, we had a choice. If you were advanced, in advanced English, you could take AP English, which was very literature-based, where you would take the class and then you would take the AP exam. And if you scored enough, you could get college credit. The other option would be to take college writing, which was a writing-based class. And if you got a B or an A in the class, you could file some paperwork with the local community college and get college credit for it. I chose the latter. I was more into writing at the time. And on paper, that seemed like a smart thing to do. In actuality, it wasn't. Again, that's all I'm going to say about that. But because of that, there were books that probably I could have read in my high school experience that I did not. So let me go over what I'm going to do. First, I'm going to talk about 3 ineffective educational experiences. I don't want to say they're bad books because none of these are about the books. Well, one of them is actually about the book. But it's not what you think it is. And I don't want, it's just, this was not effective for me, either the choice of literature or the timing or how it was taught or something like that. So I have 3 examples of that. And then I have 3 examples that I felt were really effective experiences for me. And then I am going to touch on sort of I don't want to say it is a little bit controversial, but I think it's more of like a discussion that's ongoing about a certain book that many people, at least in the United States, read in high school. And then I'm going to talk about some books I did not read in my middle school and high school years that I wish I had, and just sort of my wishes for this sort of education going forward. My kids are, next year, my younger will be in middle school, and my son will be in middle school, my daughter will be in high school, so this is really top of mind for me. There we go. I'm going to try to keep this controlled, but you know me, if you've seen any of my spicy opinion videos, I go off. Anyway, let's get started. So these are the 3 examples of times when literature was not an effective educational experience for me, and they're for different reasons. The first one was in 8th grade. We had to read The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. This is not a ding on that book, but I do not feel that it is a great book for 8th graders. So 8th grade, if you aren't familiar with the U.S. educational system, you're about 13 years old in 8th grade. I don't think it's not inappropriate. I don't think it's effective at that age. The reason is that book deals with things like the duality of natures within man, and those are sorts of things that at 13 years old, kids aren't quite developing to the point where they can truly understand that. I remember reading that book and it just not making sense. Obviously, I knew the basics of the story going into it, but I couldn't understand what it was saying because that was just a language that I did not yet speak. And that is normal for students of that age. I think had I read this book later in high school, it would have been a different experience. But I think that it was just very overly confusing and ultimately ineffective to teach this at 8th grade. I think it's very important when putting together curriculum, and again, in U.S. public schools, that's generally not teachers putting together the curriculum, but when curriculum is put together, to keep in mind where students are developmentally generally. Obviously, there's a variance in that, but you know generally where they are. And this one was just the wrong time for this book. I think the idea was that it would be a reach book. If you don't know what that is, a reach book is a book that might be a little bit above a reading level, or the subject matter might be a little bit more than beyond where a student might normally be. But with instruction and with discussion, they can reach for it and get it. But I think that that particular book at that particular time was too much of a reach, because in the 8th grade, we just weren't able to we didn't quite understand that concept in ourselves about duality of natures. There you go. Okay, this next one, this was my freshman year in high school, and it is going to sound a little bit like I'm dumping on the teacher, but I'm really not. So I'm going to have a big explanation of this. And that was Ethan Frome by Edith Wharton. This was actually what spurred this video. Last weekend when I was at Camp Yamhill, I was talking with my friend, and she said that she had recently read Ethan Frome and loved it. And I was like, really? Because I thought everybody hated that book. This was assigned to us our freshman year. Everyone in my school district their freshman year read Ethan Frome, and everyone in my class hated it. We all hated this book, and none of us hated it more than the teacher did. And I wonder, would we still have hated it if the teacher didn't hate it? You know, yes, there's the expectation that they probably keep their feelings to themselves about a book. Fine, whatever. But also human nature, when you have to teach that book 5 times a day, 4 or 5 times a day, every single year, it's going to get harder to do that. So this really brought up a couple things around teaching. One is, I do think teachers should have more choice, or at least some choice, if not more, in what they teach. For example, if instead of saying you need to teach Ethan Frome freshman year, it could be you need to teach one of these 3 books and let the teachers choose which book it is. They could alternate each year so they don't get burnt out on it. They could choose a book that they feel they're better at teaching. There's nothing magical about the book of Ethan Frome that only that book can teach. And I think that those who make the decisions about curriculum, which again are not teachers, those who make the decisions about curriculum need to allow for some flexibility in that. My second point about this particular teacher is an interesting case. So he was a little bit older than us, and I'm only bringing that up because he's probably the only teacher that I had in high school who is still working in education. The rest have retired. He was great with kids. He had a great rapport with kids. He dealt really well with kids. But for teaching material, that was not his strength. I do know about, I think a year after I graduated from high school, he moved from the classroom to administration and served as an assistant principal or vice principal, and then principals at various middle schools and high schools in our school district. He's still there. And I know that he was very effective in that role because my nieces had him when they were in middle school. And this is a problem you see in a lot of industries, that because of the ladder, people sometimes are in jobs that they should not be in, that do not suit them. And I don't know if this is still the case, but at the time, if you wanted to be a school administrator, a principal or assistant principal, you had to do your duty as a teacher first. And on the other side, if you were teaching for a while, we do not pay in this country. We don't pay teachers enough. I think that's probably one of the most important jobs in our society, and we pay them next to nothing. Do not tell me they get summer vacation every year, because yeah, unless they take some kind of extra assignment on where they are doing teaching, working during the summer, they don't get paid for that. They only get paid 9 months out of the year. They can sometimes, in our school district, they can negotiate so they take their 9 months of pay to stretch it over 12 months, which means they just get less in each paycheck. Teachers are not paid enough in this country. And that is probably the first thing you need to do to improve our education system. But let me get back on topic. I think that we need to get away, if we have not already, again, I'm only talking from my own experience, of this idea that you have to be a teacher before you be an administrator, or once you've kind of conquered teaching, and the next phase is being an administrator, because those are two very different skill sets. And I think that instead they should be looked as very different roles. And that way you get more effective administrators and you get more effective teachers, and they all should be paid more. So that's sort of my thing with Ethan Frome. That was a failure on many counts of administration. Now, will I read Ethan Frome again? Probably not. Honestly, I've not actually read Edith Wharton because of my experience with that. And I am very open. In fact, I do plan to read Edith Wharton again as an adult and see what I think, but I don't think it's gonna be Ethan Frome. There you go. Okay, so my third ineffective educational experience. This is one that actually really does have to do with the work. And this is probably going to be one of my spicy opinions. It's going to be kind of shocking what I say. Hear me out. And if you have you have a different viewpoint on it, please put it in the comments. Just be respectful. I like to hear the differing opinions, but this is where I'm coming from with this. This is another book that, another work that I read in my freshman year. And I know it is very widely read in not just American schools, but schools everywhere. And that is Romeo and Juliet. We did 2 Shakespeare plays freshman year. Shakespeare's very important. This is not about Shakespeare. Not really about Shakespeare. Because I do think you should be teaching Shakespeare, and freshman year, when you're about 14 years old, if you're unfamiliar, is a great place to start. We did 2 plays. We did Julius Caesar and Romeo and Juliet. So we did a history and a tragedy. In a perfect world, I think we should have done 3, which would be a history, a tragedy, and a comedy. I do think maybe it would be a little bit more effective to swap the tragedy out for a comedy, because Shakespeare was all about the potty humor, and no one appreciates potty humor more than high school freshmen. But I want to talk specifically about Romeo and Juliet, because this is a really interesting situation. And I'm not blaming anyone, because this is a society thing. And it's not that it's wrong. It's just something to keep in mind. I understand why people would choose, or why people who bring up curriculum would choose Romeo and Juliet. On a lot of ways, it makes sense. One, it's a very well-known play. Students will go into it already know the basics of the story. 2, it's about characters who are about the age of the students. I get that. I understand that. 3, there are adaptations that appeal to students of that age. Now there are. When I did this, we only had the Franco Zeffirelli one, which is now like all really icky because it's all like child abuse stuff. But like if I'd been a couple of years younger, we would have had the Baz Luhrmann one with Claire Danes and Leonardo DiCaprio, but that wasn't out yet. That is actually a really fun show, by the way, if you want to watch a film adaptation of Shakespeare, even though it still falls prey to what I'm about to talk about, it is still a fun adaptation. But I remember reading Romeo and Juliet and just thinking, there's things in this that don't make sense. And my class we had discussions about, there were things in this play that just did not make sense to us. With Romeo's like really fickle. He was just with this one girl, and now he's with this one, and that's true love. What? Why are they killing each other? What? And we were always told, well, you have to think about it when it was written, which is correct. And it's also incorrect. I mean, it's correct, but not incorrect. It's correct in more ways than you think. So my degree is in British history, specifically like medieval and Tudor history. And I did not know this until I was a junior or senior in college. But the way we, from 19th century on, understand Romeo and Juliet is not the way it was written, and it was not the intent. William Shakespeare didn't write his plays with the mind that in 350 years, his plays were going to be taught in school. He wrote his plays in the mind of, I'm going to put on a performance and make money and please people. This is how I make my living. He didn't think, you can't really think about the future because you don't know what the future holds. So he's really of his world. And the Tudor world was very, 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 very different than, I have to look it up. It might have been the Stuart world at this point. I can't remember the dates of it, how it all works out. But anyway, at that point in time, we'll just say at that point in time, the world was very different. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make a difference whether it's Tudor or Stuart. It was incredibly patriarchal. Fathers ruled things. Children obeyed their parents. There was no question about it. And this was not seen as a bad thing. This was seen as the structure of society. And if you mess with the society, will fall apart. So Shakespeare presents this play that we see in the 19th, 20th, 21st century as a love story between two children who fought against their parents' wishes to have their own love, and they died, they died. That's not what Shakespeare wrote, really, and that's not what the audience would have experienced. They would have experienced a cautionary tale about what happens when stupid kids, 13 to 15-year-olds are kind of stupid. They don't want to say stupid. The synapses are still developing, let's just put it that way. Don't follow the society's structure. The tragedy was not that these two young people died in love because their parents wouldn't let them be together. The tragedy was these two young people died because they did not obey their parents. And once I understood that in college, that is the world that we're dealing with, I went back and I reread Romeo and Juliet, and it made sense. Like that, all of a sudden this play made sense to me. And I go back and I think about as a freshman, even if someone sat me down and said, in the time this play was written, this is what it meant, patriarchal society, this is what it meant, I still wouldn't have been able to kind of get out of my own, I was not developmentally ready to get out, to understand that my worldview was not the worldview that always existed, that there have been different worldviews. 14-year-olds just can't, even if you explain it to them, that's not something they're going to grasp. Especially when Romeo and Juliet is very much about, on a very basic level, how individual desires and wants cannot be put above the wants and desires of society. Whereas in our world, those are much more equal, and that's a different argument. I really feel like giving Romeo and Juliet to kids this age is like giving them a crossword puzzle, but only giving them the down clues and expecting them to solve the whole puzzle. This didn't age well. It did not age well, not in the way that Taming of the Shrew did not age well, but this needs to be looked at in a completely different way. And I don't think that you can expect, when all of society looks at it in a way that it wasn't intended, you can't expect teenagers to be so much wiser to be able to understand something they haven't learned and are not developmentally able to deal with yet. If you are really tied to that love story, I have 3 words for you: West Side Story. There you go. So yes, you should be teaching Shakespeare starting at freshman year. Great. Just maybe not Romeo and Juliet. Do a comedy. I like 12th Night. There you go. I read Midsummer Night's Dream later in my high school career, and I could have handled it as a freshman. There's another option. So those are my 3 where I'm like, these were not effective. This does not work, and maybe this is something that people should brings up issues people should consider. Now I want to talk about the 3 experiences in my education, my secondary education, so middle school and high school, that were very effective. As far as me developing critical thinking skills and reading and literature skills. The first one is Flowers for Algernon, which asterisks I had to read in 7th grade and in 8th grade and 9th grade. That was not effective. There's no reason to read that all 3 years. My daughter read it in 8th grade, which I think is a perfect year to read it. Although works in 7th grade, works in 9th grade, but 8th grade is the sweet spot. This is a great book this is a great reach book for that age. They don't have to struggle with the writing style. It's a very modern writing style. It's very accessible. So they should be able to just read the prose and understand what's going on with that. But when you get to the issues, it deals with issues that students that age, yes, they may not have ever thought about it, but if they think about it and discuss it, they can still understand it. They're ready for those issues. And I think it's a really good introduction to this idea of reading work, not just to be reading work and to hear a story, but to actually think and discuss about it and maybe apply it to examples in the real world. I'm really happy to hear that they are still teaching this book in middle school. I was really happy to hear my daughter was still reading it because I think it is a very, very, very effective book for that age. So that's Flowers for Algernon. Okay, the next book was in my sophomore year in high school, so I was about 15 years old. We read Great Expectations. Dickens, like Shakespeare, needs to be taught. He's a very pivotal figure in literature, and his effect reaches beyond his books. Dickens can be intimidating. His books can be really big. They can be intimidating. So, I mean, I have not read all of Dickens, but I have read some. I think that probably the best entry point for an educational standpoint is Great Expectations. It's not super long. It's not super long. The story is one, again, the language is a little more difficult, so it is a reach in the language department. But if you're going to start reaching it, I mean, the year before you would have read Shakespeare, so Dickens should be a lot easier. So it is a little bit of a reach there. But the issues that it brings up are ones that at 15 years old, you can discuss and you can start applying and looking at critically. There's also a lot in that story that's kind of like you have Miss Havisham and all that, that's kind of grab the interest. And it's accessible. I think the only Dickens book that I can think of that is more accessible is probably too accessible, and that is A Christmas Carol. A good rule of thumb is if the best adaptation of that work is done by the Muppets, it's already too accessible. So it's not much of a reach. And then there's also the issue that has to deal with, even though it's not overtly religious, it deals with a Christian holiday, and you want to be sensitive to, all your students. So I understand that too, but I think that one's a little too easy. That's one where, yeah, the story going into it. There's nothing in the story that's going to change. There's nothing you didn't expect in that story. So I do think that Great Expectations is a really great place to start with Dickens. And I think 15 is a good age for it. Third, now this is going to be my spicy opinion, I think, just from talking to people that I know, because they all think I'm crazy because I love this book, but everybody else hated the book. I will say the fact that I love this book is a testament to teachers. This was in my American Lit class, and the best English teacher I ever had was my American Lit teacher. And this is also a book that I think at the time I was in school, everyone in the United States read it their junior year. I don't know if that's still the case, but I think it is still very widely read. And I know a lot of people hate it, but too bad, because I think it's a very important book to read. And that is The Scarlet Letter. This book is great for a lot of reasons. One, it's not very long, so it's easy to read within the context of a class. I do remember when we read Great Expectations, I felt really rushed with it because that's a 500-ish page book, so that's a lot. And that's just a lot, but The Scarlet Letter is not long. So you're able to read the book in entirety. The language is a reach, but it's not so much of a reach that you can't handle it. And you're guided there. You have a teacher to help you. So definitely, it's a reach in a language. And the issues in it, I don't want to say the issues are simplistic, because they are not, but they are issues that kids who are about 16 years old can understand at least. There are also issues that come into play in our modern society. And in a lot of ways, when I was talking about Romeo and Juliet, I talk about the power, the individual versus the society. That's present in The Scarlet Letter, but in a very American way, because America especially, we tend to value the individual more than the society. I mean, that's more important. And you start seeing that in this literature of it. So I just think that's an excellent book. I'm sorry, it hurts my heart that people hate this book because I think it's a wonderful book. I love this book, but that's not why I'm putting it here. I put it here because when I think of a book that actually grew me as a reader and grew me as a thinker, that's the one that comes to mind. So before I go on to kind of my wish list of what I'd like to see in schools and what I wish I had read, I want to talk about one book really quick. I also read this my junior year in American Lit, and it's one that's a topic of a lot of conversation. Let me rephrase that. Let me go back. I did not read this my junior year. I was supposed to read this my junior year, and I did not. If you follow my channel, you know what I'm talking about, and that is The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. I did not read this book. I couldn't get past, even if I read it out loud, I couldn't get past the dialogue. I couldn't figure out what they were saying because the dialogue is written in dialect. And when at this time, audiobooks existed, but they were meant for people who could not see. I mean, they were not as they are now, where you have audiobook narrators. Yes, they're narrating their own book, but it's a performance. It's not just a narration. At that point, it was this is how the book is very monotone. And you'd go to the library and it would be like 30 cassettes. So at that point, audiobook was not an option. And when I do this year, I'm going to listen to the audiobook of this because we had to take a district test. I BS'd my way through that test and got like a perfect score, one of the highest scores in the district. It's wrong. It's a wrong of me. I feel guilt over this and I want to rectify it. So I am talking about a book that I have not read. However, I got the highest score in the district, one of the highest scores in the district on this test. So I know about it, which, apparently in the United States, you don't need to have read books to talk about it. I think I'm in a better spot than a lot of those people. But I am going to talk about this one a little bit. There's discussion about whether this book should continue to be taught. And I've really wrestled with this. And to me, it comes down to, why is this book being taught? I could come up, and if anyone has any other reasons why this book might be taught, I'd like to hear them, because I could only come up with 3. And the first one is, like Shakespeare, like Dickens, Twain is an important writer to read, especially in the context of an American literature class. Twain is one of our great writers. You should read Twain. Fine. Why not read Tom Sawyer instead? But whatever. Fine. There you go. I understand that. 2, if you're talking about book banning, this is actually a great book to read because it's been challenged or banned pretty much from the time it was first published, but the reasons behind those challenges and those bans have changed over time. So if you're looking at it through that lens, like, let's talk about book banning and let's use this as an example, that's a great book. It's a great book to read. Huck Finn. Now the third one is, and this was how it was presented to me, this is a book that captures the African-American experience in the mid-19th century. Why are we having a white guy tell us that? No. Having a white guy tell you the African-American experience is not telling you the African-American experience. Then you get the pushback. Well, there's no other option. Again, cow poopy. You could go back and read the poems of, I think it's Phyllis Wheatley. She was a poet in the 18th century who's African-American. You can read the writings. You don't have to read fiction. You can read the writings of Frederick Douglass. That is contemporary. You could read slave narratives. You could read, which is a book I am actually reading right now. I've seen the movie, which is excellent, but I'm now reading the book, which is excellent so far. You could read 12 Years a Slave. That book came out in 1853, I think. There are options there. Just choose them. Don't fall back into this, well, like, this has got an African-American character in it, so therefore it's the African-American experience. It isn't. It is a white man's view of the African-American experience, which is not the African-American experience. You could read, it's not that much longer from Huck Finn to the Harlem Renaissance, and there's a lot there. I'm gonna put a pin in this idea for right now, because I'm gonna come back to it. I do want to talk about books that I did not read in middle school or high school that I wish I had. And again, before I get too down on my own education, it's very possible that had I taken the other route my senior year, I would have read some of these books. But here we go. The only Victorian I read was Charles Dickens. I did not read Austen. I did not read the Brontes. I didn't read Gaskell. I didn't read any of that. I read one book by Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens is very important. He's not a monolith. He is not the only voice from that period. When I went to college, I did a lot of literature classes. So for the first time, I read Austen and the Brontes and all this. So I did read them in college. But my classmates were reading it for the second and third time because they had covered it in their school and we didn't cover it in ours. In American literature, it ended with The Great Gatsby. It's like literature ended with F. Scott Fitzgerald. Something, we need more modern things. There was no Hemingway. There was no Steinbeck. There was, I didn't read To Kill a Mockingbird, which I think is the great American novel. In my view, that would be at least one of, if not the great American novels, is To Kill a Mockingbird. There's great books that are more modern. You could read The Joy Luck Club. Trust me, high school students know about mommy issues. They can handle The Joy Luck Club. Non-American literature, but they could read Like Water for Chocolate. There's another one they could understand and would be so beneficial. It's non-American. You can read, this is a secret that I don't think high school students know. There is literature that comes from places other than the United States and England. Along the same line, we never read anything in translation. The only thing that came close to me reading something in translation was not in translation. I read Le Petit Prince, The Little Prince, in French. It wasn't translated. But so we didn't read anything in translation, which look at all the wonderful books that you're killing by that. I know, okay, I'm in high school mind. I'm sorry. I know size matters. So there are some, for example, this book is not feasible because of the length of the book, but the subject matter, high school students would eat it up, and that's The Count of Monte Cristo. Like, that's readable. It's fun. It's adventureful. It is too long. I get that, but maybe as like an outside reading assignment, read this book as an option for kids, even if it's not taught specifically in the classroom. Books in translation, books by authors whose skin color might be different, who come from different parts of the world. We need to diversify our education. I can't show this because it shows kids' faces, but just right over here, kind of beyond the camera, is my son's class picture. He's in 6th grade. And the rainbow, I know that's wrong, of course, but the ethnicities that are represented in this, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. And, but it's not reflected in curriculum, at least not when I was a kid. So we really need to diversify our curriculum. We need to take into account where kids are developmentally, which I don't think, at least when I was a kid, that was something that was taken into account. We need to read own voices books. We need to look at modern books. Now, obviously, if you're doing American literature, a book written in like 2015 might not fall into the scope of that class, but it would in other classes. We could have done that in my freshman or sophomore year. You need to teach the world that the kids live in, and sticking to white people is not that world. So anyway, not the spiciest of my spicy opinion videos. I understand that, except for those of you who hate The Scarlet Letter or really love Romeo and Juliet. I understand that. There you go. That's the spiciest I got on here, and I know people are I have friends in my non-booktube life who really will scream at me when they see my thing about The Scarlet Letter, because I love that book. And I do think it's very important, and I know that everyone hated it. But I'm thinking about this a lot, because as my kids go up in their education, I pay attention to what they're taught in school. And I feel that as a parent, I'm also an educator. So it's good for me to kind of nudge them in ways that fulfill kind of maybe the gaps that they're getting. Not every system there's no perfect system. There's always going to be gaps, no matter what. But I do think if in terms of literature, the experience I had as a kid growing up in middle school and high school, if that's still what's going on, there's a lot of ways to improve. So anyway, I would love to hear your thoughts on this. What was your reading experience like in middle school and high school? Were there things that you did not read that you wished you had read? Are there books other than The Scarlet Letter that you really wish you didn't have to read? Should I give Ethan Frome another try? I don't know. Or I think, or what other, Edith Wharton book should I try? Do you think I'm way off on Romeo and Juliet? I don't think I am, by the way. I really don't think I am on Romeo and Juliet. Because I got that all from, I learned so much as a history major of like non-US history. I learned so much about US history and kind of the world that we live in now. Not just about like how we see Shakespeare, but other things. Like I learned so much about the Revolutionary War when I was studying British history. Just side note there. Anyway, I would love to hear your comments. This video, again, longer than I had hoped, and I'm sorry about that. But if you were able to stick with me the whole time, please give me a thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel if you have not. If you ring that bell, you will hear all of my weird blatherings. I post 3-ish times a week, and I would love to hear from you. All my contact information is in the description box below and at the end of this video. Thank you very much, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.